Hello friends and foes of Middle-earth, and welcome back. Today we'll dive into one of the most asked questions within the fandom. Did Balrogs have wings? Over the years, I've heard countless fans argue for either case. So hopefully today we can do a full investigation to this question and finally get a definitive answer. Let's first take a look at the arguments that suggest they do actually have wings. We'll start by looking at the most popular one, taken from the Lord of the Rings itself. In the 5th chapter of Book 2 of the Fellowship of the Ring, titled The Bridge of Khazad-dûm. It is here that we encounter the Balrog, Durin Spain. Here we can read the following. His enemy halted again, facing him, and the shadow about it reached out like two vast wings. Now the key word here is like. So Tolkien does not say it spread out its wings, but that the shadow about it spreads out like wings. It's simply there to paint a picture, a metaphor, so that we in our imagination can visualize how vast the shadow actually might be. It's a simile. Now I have presented this quote in chronological order, as the next one comes after, and is often used more vividly to argue for wings. But the order of these two quotes is actually crucial, but the line refers to the descriptive image and not to the actual wings. Quote, "It stepped forward slowly on the bridge, and suddenly it drew itself up to a great height, and its wings were spread from wall to wall." I think it's fair if people have read this and came to the conclusion the Balrogs have wings. But as I said, it is simply referring to the previous lines, only said a couple of lines earlier. But how can we be certain Tolkien's, like two vast wings, is just a simile and not meant to be understood as actual wings? Well, if we take a closer look at the draft of the chapter, we will notice that wings are neither mentioned in draft A or B. It is first in C that we get a very similar line to the final version. The Balrog halted facing him, and the shadow about it reached out like great wings. So it is undeniably a simile. Now, some might argue that Tolkien would never use a simile, but he actually does, in the very same chapter when he describes the Balrog like this. "For a moment the orcs quailed, and the fiery shadow halted." So the fiery shadow is the Balrog. But we know that it is not a shadow, but like a shadow. Therefore, there is not only evidence that Tolkien used such terms several times as figurative language in this encounter, but that he specifically used a metaphor from a previous simile. Therefore, the conclusion is quite clear. There is no doubt that the second mention of wings refers to the shadow about the Balrog. So Durin Spain, the Balrog of Moria, does not have wings. These wings, or rather the shadow, even seem to vanish as the Balrog falls, which also indicates they were not physical wings. With a terrible cry, the Balrog fell forward, and its shadow plunked down and vanished. Now that we've debunked this part, let's move on to the other argument people make for flying Balrogs. Let's start with the easy one, that can be found in Appendix A, Durin's Folk. "Thus they roused from sleep a thing of terror, that flying from Thangorodrim had lain hidden at the foundations of the earth since the coming of the host of the west, a Balrog of Morgoth." So the focus is on the word flying, but it simply means fleeing. This is also used elsewhere by Tolkien throughout his works. Just think of Gandalf's last words to the Fellowship as he falls: "Fly, you fools." Obviously, he does not mean for them to grow wings and fly away. But you might say there's a difference between fly and flying. So here's another example from the very same chapter, The Bridge of Khazad-dûm. "Gandalf came flying down the steps, and he fell to the ground in the midst of the company." Hopefully any sensible person knows Gandalf didn't grow wings to fly down the stairs. I hope we all agree on that. But if that's not enough, here's another quote from the same chapter also. "Even as Aragorn and Boromir came flying back, the rest of the bridge cracked and fell." So now that we have debunked the flying argument, we'll take a look at a very similar case, where there's also the words chosen that have led to some misinterpretations. From Morgoth's Ring we have the following quote. "Swiftly they arose, and they passed with winged speed over Hithlum, and came to Lamoth as tempest of fire." So the focus is on the "with winged speed," where some have interpreted it as they flew with wings over Hithlum,
to the aid of Morgoth, but it is figurative language, meaning speed as if with wings. It simply means that the Balrogs were traveling with great speed. It is of course remarkable how they came to his rescue, as the distance is quite substantial, but who knows how long it actually took.
But you might wonder, what about Tolkien's early conceptions of the Balrogs, before he wrote The Lord of the Rings? If we take a look at The Fall of Gondolin, one of Tolkien's earliest writings, we can read this. Then arose Thondor, king of eagles, and he loved not Milko, for Milko had caught many of his kindred and chained them against sharp rocks, to squeeze from them the magic words whereby he might learn to fly, for he dreamed of contending even against Manwë in the air. And when they would not tell, he cut off their wings and sought to fashion therefrom a mighty pair for his use, but it availed not. Milko, or Milkor, would not need to have tried to get the secret of flight from the eagles if Balrogs could indeed fly. Therefore, the evidence is quite clear again and undeniable. Balrogs could not fly. If Balrogs had wings, Milko would have realized the futility in fashioning a pair of wings for himself without the magic words. Therefore, Balrogs did not have wings. So, this earliest conception of Balrogs did not have wings and could not fly. From the earliest Silmarillion, we also have this line: the eagles dwell out of reach of Orc and Balrog, and are great foes of Morgoth and his people. This is written after the previous quote and comes to the same conclusion. If the eagles are out of reach of the Balrogs, it means they can't fly.
From the Silmarillion, we also have this: in the front of that fire came Glaurung the Golden, father of dragons, in his full might, and in his train were Balrogs, and behind them came the black armies of the Orcs, in multitudes such as the Noldor had never before seen or imagined. Since Glaurung was both wingless and flightless, the sentence seems to suggest Balrogs were like that as well, as they were in his train. This line is similar to a line found in the early versions, as can be found in The Lost Road and other writings. The last two quotes comes also from this book, Tolkien's last revisions of the Silmarillion before the writing of The Lord of the Rings.
Out of the pits of Angband there issued the winged dragons that had not before been seen, for until that day no creatures of his cruel thought had yet assailed the air. And here's the other that proves that early on Balrogs were created by Milkor.
This is of course different from how it is in the actual lore, where the Balrogs are Maya and not created by Milkor.
These were the first made of his creatures. Their hearts were of fire, and they had whips of flame. The gnomes in later days named them Balrogs. Here it's clear the dragons are the first creatures of Morgoth to fly, so we can conclude the Balrogs could not. Now, since Balrogs at this time could not fly, they must not have wings. This is because up to this point, wings have only existed in Tolkien's works for the purpose of flight. And also, the Balrogs have been proven to have not had wings in their earliest conception.
Furthermore, the early conception of Balrogs included them riding on dragons. This also seems to imply that they were incapable of flight, though not all dragons could fly, of course, but still. Now we have looked at the arguments that speak for wings and debunked them. So what further evidence do we have to prove that they do not have wings? Interestingly enough, we know at least 2 Balrogs that fell to their ruin from the Silmarillion. Many other songs that have been sung of the duel of Glorfindel with the Balrog upon a pinnacle of rock in that high place, and both fell to ruin in the abyss. It is curious that it could fall to its death if it had wings and could indeed fly. But more curiously is it that we know of a similar Balrog that dies much in the same way. I threw down my enemy, and he fell from the high place and broke the mountainside, where he smote it in his ruin. These deaths are often used as arguments against the idea of winged Balrogs, and I wholeheartedly agree. One could argue that perhaps both of these Balrogs were injured or exhausted, or somehow unable to spread their wings, but as we have discovered, there is no evidence for them to have wings to begin with, so it's a wishful argument. On top of that, it seems less likely, as we have 2 accounts of Balrogs falling to their death. And so we come to the conclusion to this question. We have learned that Balrogs did not have wings in the earliest conception, nor throughout the various rewritings and new versions of the different stories. And there's no evidence in any passages that they indeed had wings. So there's no reason to believe they had wings, and no substantial evidence
that argue for it. It is hereby all debunked.
Wings do of course look cool, but I do think Tolkien's description is more menacing. But let me know what you think down below.
I hope you've all learned something and come to terms with the evidence provided here, even if it goes against what you believed at first. If you still believe they have wings, well, I urge you to watch again. Or perhaps you know someone who thinks they have wings. Send them here, and hopefully the evidence provided will convince them otherwise. It's been an honor answering this question and having you watching this long. Special thanks to all the patrons and YouTube members. If you want to know the full story of the Balrog of Moria, you should watch this video next. Farewell till next time.